Welcome to today's Explainer. I am incredibly excited to dive into this one with you. We're looking at a massive structural shift in the global economy, one that honestly rarely gets the attention it deserves. Today, we're exploring how the Gulf states are radically reshaping the global wealth map through something that sounds completely like science fiction, but it's happening right now: sovereign AI ownership. We're going to break down how some of the most resource-rich nations on Earth are preparing for a post-labor world, and they aren't doing it by tweaking tax codes. No, they're attempting to buy the very machines that might replace human work. Okay, let's dive right in. Here is our quick roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with the unpulled lever, then move to the $5 trillion answer and the capital pivot. After that, we'll ground things with the honest read, and finally ask, what travels? Section 1, the unpulled lever, exploring the post-labor problem. So, we face this profound post-labor puzzle. When economists talk about an AI-driven economy, their core worry basically boils down to this: what actually happens if the returns to capital completely swamp the returns to labor? Think about it. If machines, algorithms, and sheer compute power end up doing the vast majority of the productive work, well, the people who actually own those productive assets are going to capture all the economic gains. Meanwhile, traditional wages could just stagnate or fall. So the ultimate question really becomes, who owns the machines? Now, across the West, places like the EU, the Nordics, Britain, the US, governments are mostly trying to answer this with a mix of rules, skills training, and income floors. But notice what's missing. They leave the policy lever marked capital and ownership practically untouched. Western models generally decline to ask who actually owns the productive technology, but the Gulf states, they ask it first. They are literally the one place on the map that grabs that ownership lever, and they pull it hard. That brings us to Section 2, the $5 trillion answer: state-scale ownership in action. $5 trillion. That is a 5 with 12 zeros. To put that massive number into perspective, that's roughly the entire economic output of Japan. That is the combined holding power of the Gulf's sovereign wealth funds. We're talking about Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, or PIF, Abu Dhabi's ADIA and Mubadala, Qatar's QIA, and others. It is an absolutely staggering amount of concentrated capital, and the Gulf is using it to run a version of the ownership answer that textbook economists usually only dream about: broad public ownership of capital. So you might be wondering, how does that $5 trillion actually reach the people? Well, the crucial point is that it functions as what we can call a capital dividend. The rentier state owns the resource. The sovereign wealth fund converts it into a capital base, and then the returns fund the citizenry's livelihoods. And this isn't just a monthly universal basic income check arriving in the mail. It's distributed as guaranteed public sector employment, heavy subsidies, free or near-free public services, and get this, absolutely zero income tax. The Gulf has essentially been running this ownership model for half a century. It just happens to be funded by oil right now rather than by taxing robots. Now, to really grasp how unique this is, we have to compare it to the other famous sovereign wealth fund out there, Norway. Norway's fund is fundamentally a savings vehicle. It preserves wealth for future generations, and only a tiny, tiny slice is spent each year. The Gulf funds are totally different. They are distribution vehicles. They exist largely to underwrite the present-day living standards of their citizens. Norway hoards the dividend. The Gulf pays it out. And that single distinction, that makes the Gulf the closest thing in the world right now to a working capital dividend state. Section 3, the capital pivot, transitioning from oil to AI. Here's the reality check. Oil is a depleting, volatile resource. It's a wasting asset. I mean, if your family's entire income relied on a well that was slowly drying up, you'd probably take whatever cash you had left and invest in a new business, right? That's exactly what's happening here. If this capital dividend is going to survive, the Gulf knows it needs to buy into the next means of production while it still has the cash to do so. And that next means of production is AI, compute, and data centers. Plus, the region's cheap energy and abundant solar power make it a perfectly natural home for power-hungry AI infrastructure. The strategy is incredibly coherent and far-sighted on its own terms. Use today's oil to own tomorrow's robots. That way, the dividend outlives the petroleum that originally built it. The mechanics and the sheer speed here are simply astonishing. The UAE actually moved first, setting up a Ministry of AI way back in 2017. Fast forward to 2024, and the UAE backs MGX, which is a roughly $100 billion AI infrastructure investment vehicle backed by Mubadala.
Then, in 2025, Saudi Arabia launches Human, a wholly owned PIF subsidiary acting as the kingdom's national AI champion. And by 2026, we see massive regional Stargate data center buildouts. They aren't just buying software subscriptions here. They are taking direct stakes in frontier labs, chips, and compute infrastructure. They are making the state an actual owner of the AI economy, not just a customer.
If we break down the core levers of a post-labor economy, the Gulf strategy is highly specific. Capital and ownership, extremely strong, driven completely by the state funds. Income floor, also strong. The state provision is highly generous, but, and this is a crucial asterisk, it's for citizens only. What about work, time, and skills? Well, that's partial. There are heavy investments in national talent, like Saudi's Vision 2030, but again, it's heavily focused on nationals. And institutions? Very minimal. The state acts as a promoter to attract and own the industry, rather than trying to constrain it with heavy, rights-based guardrails or robust labor protections. When you put this next to the United States, it's basically a complete mirror image. The U.S. runs minimal state capital, a minimal income floor, and bets almost entirely on private markets to solve the AI transition. The Gulf, on the other hand, runs strong state capital, a strong income floor, and bets on massive public ownership. It's fascinating, really. It is the exact same technological question being met with the exact opposite economic answer.
Section 4, the honest read, structural caveats and trade-offs.
Now, we need to be really clear about something. We cannot separate that $5 trillion from the societal system it operates within. The controversial elements of the Gulf model are not accidents. They aren't just byproducts. They are the structural, load-bearing pillars of the entire system. Without them, the math simply does not work. So what exactly are these core realities? Well, there are 4 main ones to understand. The system is heavily gated by citizenship, it relies on an authoritarian bargain, it is entirely funded by a resource windfall, and right now it is a system actively under strain. Let's unpack these neutrally one by one to see exactly how this ecosystem balances itself out. First up, the citizenship gate. The structural reality of this model is that the incredible generosity of the dividend is exclusive. The vast majority of the Gulf workforce are actually non-citizen expatriates. In the UAE and Qatar, for example, nationals are actually a small minority of the overall population. These expatriates do the bulk of the labor under heavily criticized systems, and they are largely excluded from the dividend. The state can afford such a high income floor for its citizens precisely because it doesn't extend that same citizenship to most of the people doing the work. The floor is real, but so is the exclusion. Second, there is the political reality. Scholars often refer to this setup as an authoritarian welfare state. Social rights and economic provisions are extended in place of, not alongside, political and civil rights. The capital dividend acts as an incredibly powerful tool for regime stability. Essentially, state provision substitutes for political participation. You simply cannot lift the Gulf's wealth distribution machinery out of the political system it's hardwired into. Furthermore, this cradle-to-grave system is currently under some intense, immediate strain. Populations are growing rapidly, and as we know, oil revenues are notoriously volatile. Because of this pressure, the state is actively and somewhat quietly trimming subsidies. They're introducing value-added taxes, which were totally unheard of not too long ago, and they're enforcing strict quotas to push citizens out of those guaranteed public jobs and into private sector work. They are essentially asking this model to do much more while simultaneously trying to rebuild its very foundation mid-flight. Section 5. What travels? Global lessons from the Gulf. Okay, so even with all those caveats, the autocracy, the exclusion, the reliance on an oil windfall, the underlying macroeconomic principle here is still incredibly sound. It is exactly what post-labor economists have been suggesting for years: public ownership of capital where the returns are distributed broadly to the population. The Gulf proves that pulling the ownership lever actually works, and it works at an enormous scale. It proves that the abstract idea of taxing or owning the robots to pay the people is technically feasible in the real world. And this brings us to what might be the most portable export of all from this region, the Sovereign AI Fund playbook. Think about it. The idea of a state buying directly into the AI capital stack, whether that's compute, infrastructure, or frontier models, to hedge against the post-labor transition, that is a highly rational move. We are already seeing this idea spread well beyond the Gulf. Any government out there trying to figure out how its citizens will survive an AI revolution is looking very closely at this playbook. They want to ensure their nation isn't left behind as merely an economic tenant in an AI-owned world. Which leaves us with this final, profound thought to chew on.
The Gulf has shown us that a state absolutely can own the capital and distribute the returns, but they've also shown us that ownership without rights is a very complicated bargain. So the multi-trillion-dollar question of our time is this: could a democracy, in theory, build a citizens' wealth fund to buy into the AI economy and pay out a genuine dividend without all the exclusion and without sacrificing democratic rights? It's a huge question. Thank you so much for exploring this explainer with me today. Keep learning, and I will see you next time.